Coming up on today's show.
Life doesn't stop, so we go through transitions. I recently worked with a client that had the husband had 4 kids and she had 2 kids. So between the two of them, now they have 6 children.
You know, when you're in that like 40 plus, you're not only dealing with, your kids' problems and some of those things and their transitions, but you may have parents that you're also dealing with.
Some of our parents may be wanting to age in place, which they may not want to be moving from their homes. They may not be right down the street from us anymore.
Getting organized during life transitions. Today on Keeping You Organized. Well, welcome to Keeping You Organized. Today we're going to talk about transitions, and there are all kinds of transitions in life that we go through, and we'll dig into that a little bit deeper here today with Chris Scrott from Organizing Maniacs. Chris, how you doing?
I'm good. Hey, welcome.
Hey,
thanks for having me.
Well, yeah, you can welcome me because we're like looking right into your home there, and I know you're.
Yes, welcome into my home. I cleaned up for you guys.
That's awesome. Well, I would expect that. It would be kind of weird to have a big mess there. People would wonder what we're talking about, but.
People have really high expectations of organized people,
so
I try to comply.
Isn't it true? Okay. Well, let's talk today about, life transitions is something that we go through all kinds of different ones at different stages of our life. And let's, on a broad level, kind of summarize how that affects us and maybe what some of those life transitions are.
Yeah, so I think over the last few years, I've really been noticing how people are going through life transitions. And I noticed that when we think of life transitions, we always think of like the big unexpected things. We think about when people, move, they have to sell their home, or when they lose a loved one, or when something tragic happens. We always think of life transitions in a negative way. Mm-hmm. But I started thinking that there's so much other things that happen to people that also contribute to their life transitions that we are not necessarily crediting to how it overwhelms people. And I was thinking, like, even, sometimes I meet people and they're getting married and they're merging their houses together, and people would think like, well, it's so happy. Everything should be perfect. And it's really not. They were just so overwhelmed, and they were feeling incapable of, merging their houses together, or they're feeling like, did we do the right thing? Like, are our kids going to be okay? And I started really digging deeper into that thought with people and try to understand, like, why is this so hard for you? Like, what do you need? How can we help you? What do you feel like you're missing? And then the other thing that I thought also about life transitions is that life doesn't stop, so we go through transitions. I recently worked with a client that had the husband had 4 kids and she had 2 kids. So between the two of them, now they have 6 children, and they're trying to downsize 2 different homes. And then they purchase a 3rd home and try to make all of this happen while they're trying to get married. And one of the kids is going off to college. And, from the outside, I kept thinking, like, all of these are really good things, but they are just really overwhelming the system. And there's all of the everyday stuff that we have to go through that sometimes doesn't feel like a really big life transition, but it could be, right? Whether it's like, sometimes I think like spring comes around and I feel overwhelmed because I have to call the HVAC guy and I have to deal with all kinds of things. So I'm just trying to be aware, and I'm also trying to talk about that with my colleagues and people out in the world, is that transitions are difficult, and a lot of it is accumulation of all of the things that are happening at the same time that we're not paying attention.
Right. And I think about I have a senior in high school, graduated this year, and now is transitioning off to college. And in her point of view, that's a huge transition, and it is for her.
Yeah.
But then, you've got, and we talked about this before we got on here, is that, when you're in that like 40 plus, you're not only dealing with, your kids' problems and some of those things and their transitions, but you may have parents that you're also dealing with. And so I think that seems like the big boat anchor right there when you're kind of stuck in the middle. don't you think?
Yeah. And you and I just talked about like I think you asked a really good question. You were like, what is so unique about life transitions in your 40s? And what I find, and then once I answered your question, you were like, oh yeah, I'm going through all of these life transitions myself. That just seems like it would be, okay, but there's a lot going on in my life. Is that a lot of us have children and they're going through their own life transitions in their own way, and it's very overwhelming for them. Like, going off to college is one of the like biggest transitions you go through when you're a young person. You're no longer going to be living at home, your parents are not going to be there every day, and that's frightening for some people. And we also have our aging parents, right? Some of our parents may be wanting to age in place, which they may not want to be moving from their homes. They may not be right down the street from us anymore. There's a significant amount of people that are going to have dementia and Alzheimer's, and we're going to have to, figure out a way to care for our parents. And once again, the research shows that we shouldn't move them very far. We should keep them in their environment, and that's all very difficult because we are no longer like we used to, where I grew up. My grandmother lived like 6 blocks away. Most of my aunts lived down the street, so we were like, we were literally unified. If anybody needed anything, everybody was down the street. But we don't live that life anymore.
Yeah.
I live here. My siblings live in Connecticut, and we so happen to all live, within a couple of hours of each other. But it's not always like that for families. So I feel like my people on the 40 plus age group are just really starting to feel that pressure on both ends from our loved ones.
Right. Well, and you read a lot about the millennial generation, which it would be our older kids, and a lot of them are moving back home because of student loans and the financial pressures, and that adds. So my first area that I think we should talk about is, which we talk about a lot when we're talking about getting organized, is overwhelm. How does overwhelm play into maybe the strategies that you're going to use to help someone deal with these things?
Yeah, I think we undermine overwhelm. Like sometimes we as professional organizers will go see people and they'll say like, oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed. And it's really easy to think, because we're organized, people be like, this is not a big deal, right? We can totally just clean this up and organize it in a day. Where our clients are just feeling not just the overwhelm of that one piece, but they're feeling the overwhelm of their entire lives. So, and sometimes when I hear my friends saying like, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I always ask the question, like, tell me a little bit more about that. Like, what is overwhelming you? Because sometimes what we see from the outside is not what's really happening on the inside. Right. So I try to be curious about people when they say things like that, and not be like quick to say like, oh my God, it's, everything is so good in your life and you have so much going for you, and just not to minimize that overwhelm that people are feeling.
Yeah, I was talking to my wife this morning and she was overwhelmed, but she has to go to the grocery store and has to plan the menu and do all that, which is, it's a big 2 or 3 hour ordeal, when you count all the time it takes to plan and make menus, then go do the shopping. But I think if you were to look at her whole life, there's a lot of other things. There's our daughter going into college. There's another one, considering marriage and all kinds, so there's a lot going on. What I want to talk about next, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to talk about the cousin of overwhelm, which is guilt. And I think a lot of us, feel like, especially when we're in our 40s and 50s, we want to feel like we have it all together because, these are our prime years. So let's talk about that when we come back. We're with Chris Scott talking about getting organized during life transitions, and we'll be right back. We're back now and keeping you organized, talking about getting organized during life transitions, those times, and we have everything, I think, from the day we're born through the day we get out of high school to the day we get married and the day we have, I mean, there's lots of life transitions. And we have on with us Chris Scott from Organizing Maniacs. And Chris, we're kind of focusing, I think you used the word sandwich generation, where we're sandwiched in between, kids that are growing up, and we have parents we're dealing with, and a lot of, that overwhelm, which we talked about before, is definitely present. But what about guilt? I mean, I think a lot of us in our 40s and 50s want to feel like we got it together. We finally got our life all organized, and we feel guilty when we look bad. Is that something you see when dealing with clients?
Yeah, I think that is so common. And you should just share about your wife feeling overwhelmed. And I think the reaction that we all have is like, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I should be able to go grocery shopping, when the truth is that, like, she wasn't just probably talking about the grocery shopping, right? There are all of these things happening in your lives right now, and some of it's pretty amazing, but it still doesn't change the fact that it's overwhelming. Right. And then, of course, there's the guilt, because we should be able to handle these things because they are happy, because they're good, because they're bringing, like, raising children is an amazing thing. Right. So it sets in guilt that we shouldn't feel this way, and that we shouldn't honor, the overwhelm and how we're feeling. And I find that it's so hard to get over that. I wake up some days, and I don't have children, but I feel like all of these things that I'm responsible for, and I'm thinking, like, I'm feeling overwhelmed. And then I'm always discounting it. I'm like, well, I'm not as bad as, like John, who has like
terrible
4 kids, and he's like, going, some of them are going off to college, some of them are considering marriage. I'm like, I'm responsible for, some plants right now. And so, but it's really easy for us to minimize how we feel and just really not allow ourselves to feel like, okay, how am I going to deal with my overwhelm?
Right. Well, I think that brings us to the point of, how do we deal with overwhelm and guilt, and what do we need in order to get organized when we're in this situation? You're working with clients like this. Yeah. How do you approach it? What are the steps that we need to look at?
Yeah, so a couple of things I like to tell people is like, we don't want to do things in isolation. Like, if you're feeling guilty, you want to tell someone. If you don't have a family member that you trust, you don't have a friend that you trust, you should go find somebody that you can say, like, just the fact that you can say, like, I'm feeling overwhelmed may be helpful for you. Mm-hmm. And I think that sometimes when people are organizing, people take for granted how time consuming organizing is. I'm sure you see this all the time. People are like, I want to organize my entire house in 4 hours. Can you help me?
Yes.
I'm like, no, we can't do that, because we don't have magic wands, right? We don't have magic folders that just make your paperwork go inside. So I tell people, like, tell somebody how you're feeling, create a buddy system. I feel like accountability, all of the research I've been reading, which has to do with, like, telling someone, being accountable, finding a support system. And I think that is, like, the best way to deal with our anxiety. If we go back in time, and once again, I just draw back on my own personal history. I grew up in a family that's very medley, right? Like, my mom has 6 siblings, and so do my dad. So between the two of them, I have like 12, aunts, and plus they are all married, and I have 35 first cousins. And whenever there was something going on, you had somebody you went to and you talked about, or, if you felt a need, that was somewhere to go. And I feel like we're not as connected as we used to be. And the research also shows that, social media has made us more alone than ever before. Mm-hmm. And so maybe my quest here is to just, like, get people to, like, start talking about these things, about what is overwhelming in their home and how they can be more organized in community. And maybe call a friend to come over and help you if working with an organizer is not in your budget, or, find someone to just hang out, find some virtual way to be connected with people that may make you feel like, okay, I'm not the only person going through this, and it's okay that I'm overwhelmed. It's okay that I want to make a change, but I also can't do this alone.
Right. Oh, I think that's great advice too. And I think about, like, a rope that has maybe, three strands, when you wind it together, it's a lot stronger. It's the same way with getting a support system.
Yeah.
So like if someone's getting organized, and I know as a professional organizer, when you go in and meet with people, maybe that first session is talking, it's debriefing, maybe getting some of that stuff out of their mind that's helping them or blocking them from getting organized. And so how could like a friend who maybe is not a professional organizer work with somebody, or do you think it would just be a natural thing that they could go in and help them just, how would you coach a friend to help a friend?
Oh, I love that question because, people call here all the time and they say like, I want to hire you to come and help me, but then I want my friend to be there. And I always say like, well, that's a disaster waiting to happen because your friend is going to be judgmental. Your friend is going to just tell you to get rid of stuff. Your friend is just going to get impatient. So in order to be a good buddy, to help someone out of overwhelmed, you have to like leave your preconceived ideas of what needs to happen at the front door.
Yes.
And then you need to be present for your friend, like without judgment, without minimizing the overwhelmed, without telling them to just get rid of things, without telling them how easy it is to, do whatever thing that they can't do. Because I think that in being present for people the way they need us to be, we can be better friends, not just in organizing, but we can just be better friends just in life.
Right. And I think too, you could probably make a deal with them. You come over and help me get organized, and I'll come over and help you get organized, and the roles can switch too, right?
Yeah, because it's so much easier. I don't know about you, but it's so much easier to help other people get rid of their stuff, right?
Yes.
Sometimes, like the other day, I was looking through my pile of shoes and I was like, I should get rid of some shoes. And then I started pulling them out and I was like, oh, this is my favorite blue pair. I can't get rid of them. Oh, these are the boots that I wear when I went to Europe last year. Yeah. I can't get rid of them. Oh, these are my favorite party shoes. And then before you knew it, I went through all of my shoes and got rid of one pair.
Nothing. Yeah. Well, that was good. At least you got one pair, right?
Trust me, I needed to get rid of probably at least like 7 or 8 pairs.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anything else on this creating a support system that you want to add here before we wrap up?
Well, I believe in communities, and I believe that finding a way out sometimes is really hard. Asking for help is really hard. Like I was thinking the other day, like when did we 40-some just like decided that we are no longer going to ask people for help, and that asking for help is a bad thing? Right. So I'm just reminding myself and some of my friends and some of my clients that it is okay to find community, however it is that you can, and reach out to people. Right. Reach out to somebody that you haven't reached out to in a long time that you have wanted to, because I'm sure that person could use a friend just like you. Right.
I heard, I think it was in a sales training or something like that, where if you're selling to family and friends and things like, you might even just open up saying, I need your help.
Yeah.
And most people, if they're really friends or they're, oh yeah, I would, because most people want to help, but most people don't want to be helped. I don't know what that dynamic is.
I don't know that we don't want to be helped. I think we're just afraid of like asking for help, right? I think, and I see that a lot in organizing. People call and they hire us and they're like, well, I don't want to tell anybody.
Yeah. Don't let anyone know that I have to hire an organizer to work with me because, they might think I'm unorganized, right?
Yeah. Well, they may think less of me as a person because I am disorganized or because I had to ask for help. And I'm like, I just don't understand that. But I find myself sometimes feeling the same way, like I could have called a buddy to help me with my shoes, but I was like, no, I don't want to ask anybody for help.
Right. Well, I think we've kind of summarized it here. To help with the overwhelm and the guilt and all that, get a support system in place. And it might be as simple as asking a friend for help or contacting a professional organizer. And let's say they wanted to get a hold of you. Why don't you tell us just in a brief few moments here about your business, what kind of clients you work with, and how they can go about getting a hold of you.
Yeah, so I own Organizing Maniacs outside Washington, D.C. So we cover the metro area, and we work with a lot of clients that have brain-based challenges. So a lot of our clients have ADD, ADHD, OCD, and hoarding tendencies. And people can find us at organizingmaniacs.com.
Great. And do you do any virtual coaching, or is it all just in the D.C. area there?
I do virtual coaching,
Okay.
yes, for individuals and businesses.
Awesome. Well, great. We'll have your contact information in the show notes. Chris, thanks again for a great episode, and I think it's going to help us make some of those right moves towards getting organized during these life transitions.
Thank you, John, and good luck to your daughter going off to college.
Oh yeah, well that's a whole nother topic for another episode on how to get organized for college. In fact, we do have some episodes about that. But folks, there you have it. Life transitions. Think about where you're at and remember to ask for help and come back next time here on Keeping You Organized.